up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I am your host, Zach Guggenheim, and we are here for the Week 6 recap. We're going to take a look at Big Ten power rankings, my national top 10, which, let me be honest with you guys, the top 10 is really, really hard to rank. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the controversy in the rankings. And then as I do the power rankings, I'm going to talk a little bit about how each team performed. Obviously, we're going to get to Iowa, Penn State, and what happened there. All that and more on the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. Make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, especially for Apple Podcasts. If you can leave a review, leave a rating, even if it's a 1-star rating. I just want to know what you guys think. I'd love to hear your feedback, just how we're doing. Also, real quick, just a little heads up in terms of scheduling. So this is obviously going to release Tuesday morning. We're going to do our normal picks on Thursday morning. And then a mid-season review is going to happen either Saturday or Sunday morning. It depends on time and what I have time to do this week. But we're going to talk about everything kind of from week 6 and everything that preceded it. So whatever happens this week, if you listen to the mid-season review and you're like, wait a minute, that team's not 6-0, they're 6-1, or they're 7-0, or all that, just realize we are doing the mid-season review. I'm recording before everything that happens in week 7, but it's probably going to come out. It'll either come out the morning of week 7 games, or it'll come out later on. So just understand that. But what we're going to do right now, I'm going to do power rankings and then my national top 10, and we'll take a quick commercial break. I'm going to start from 14 and go all the way up. And let me just be real clear, and this is going to be true with my national top 10 as well. The power rankings are kind of in segments of difficulty to rank, or tiers, I should say. And I would say there are 4 tiers, if I'm honest. There are 4 tiers of teams in this group. And I would say 14 and 13 is a tier. And then 12 through 8 is a tier. And then 7 and 6 is a tier. And then 5 through 1 is a tier. Okay, so that's my disclaimer. And then when we get to the national top 10, it's a mess. And we're going to talk more in depth about that after the commercial break. But I'll just start by saying number 14 is Northwestern. That hasn't changed. They were on a bye this past week. And the only reason why they're below Illinois is because Illinois has actually beat a Power 5 team. So Northwestern is 14. They have their wins just don't measure up. They beat Indiana State, and they beat, I'm trying to remember the other team that they beat. It was they beat Ohio. And they've just gotten shellacked by everybody else. So Northwestern 14, they haven't been shellacked. They lost by 7 to Duke. They lost by 17 to Michigan State. But I mean, they've been bad. Illinois 13, they lost 24-0 to Wisconsin. They were ranked 13th last week. And Illinois, I thought they would put up more of a fight, but they did absolutely nothing. Obviously, they put up 0. Art Sitkowski played in that game. I honestly did not get a chance to watch much of that game. All I saw was that at halftime, Wisconsin was up 10-0, and Graham Mertz had thrown for like 17 yards and an interception. And I'm like, how are you losing 10-0 when Graham Mertz has only thrown for like 17 yards? I'm not going to go back and watch that game. I'm just going to be flat out honest with you guys. Not going to watch it. Purdue is at 12. They were on a bye, and this kind of starts this next tier of teams. I just don't know where to rank them. So I have Purdue at 12. I have Minnesota at 11. They were also on a bye. Quite honestly, I have Purdue below Minnesota because Purdue lost to Minnesota. And I have Minnesota at 11 because Minnesota lost to freaking Bowling Green, who lost to Akron. So I'm just saying, don't lose to Bowling Green, and then you'll be out of the bottom 4 of this mess. And Purdue is just there by proxy, but Purdue can make their way up, especially they have a big game against Iowa this week. Number 10 is Maryland. People might ask, why is Maryland 10th? They've lost, to two really good teams in Ohio State and Iowa. They have lost by an average of 43.5 points to Iowa and Ohio State. And they do this every year. If you're a Maryland fan and you're like, we were 4-0. Yeah, you do this every year. 2-0, or you're 3-0, or you're 4-0, and you have a great win at the beginning of the season. And everybody's like, maybe Maryland will do something. They've got some playmakers. They've got some dudes. This is great. And then you face a real team. You face Iowa and you face Ohio State. You lost by 37 to Iowa and you were never in it. And you lost by 49 to Ohio State. I'm so frustrated. I'm so disappointed in Maryland. I got the average point total wrong. It's not 43.5, it's 43. They lost by an average of 43 points to those two teams. They have stunk it up. I know they had injuries, but Maryland is at 10, and they're not getting any higher until they can prove to me that they can at least compete with a higher level Big Ten team. I have Rutgers at 9. They were 8 last week. Maryland was 6 last week, by the way, but Rutgers is 9. They were 8 last week. They lost 31-13 to Michigan State. That score it's better than the game actually was. I think Michigan State had almost 600 yards in that game, but at least Rutgers kind of was in it for most of the game, just like they were kind of in it against Michigan. They were never really in it against Ohio State, but I think for Rutgers, the fact that they kept it within 2 scores for most of that game, and they kept it really close with Michigan, I think is a huge step forward, but they're still in the bottom half of the Big Ten. Number 9, I have Indiana at 8. They were on a bye this week. Honestly, 8 through 12, I felt like they were all pretty meh. Like I could put them in any order, but I think Indiana would beat Rutgers and Maryland right now, even though their offense has been putrid. I think Indiana would be better. I have Wisconsin at 7. They were 10th last week. They did the thing that they were able to avoid the upset. They won 24-0, but again, the passing game is there's just nothing there that's exciting right now in the passing game. And they're going to need that passing game, even with a lot of the difficulty in the West, or the lack of difficulty, I should say, in the West. Number 6, I have Nebraska. I had them 7th. And the sole reason why they're 6th is because aside from closing out games, they look competent. But I will say it, I cannot believe I put my faith in Scott Frost. And I cannot believe I put my faith in Adrian Martinez. I thought Nebraska would upset Michigan. And I am so disappointed in myself that I ever put my hope in that idea. Of course they struggled. Of course they fumble going into the last 2 minutes of that. Of course they do it. This is what Nebraska does under Scott Frost. And Nebraska has talent. They should be at minimum 5-2 right now. Maybe 6-1, maybe even 7-0. I just don't know. I don't know what to do with Nebraska, but they're 6th because I don't know who else I'm going to put there. Like, if I'm honest, I think Nebraska beats everybody else below. So I've got Nebraska 6. I don't feel very confident about that, but Nebraska 6. Michigan State, I have 5. I had them at 4 last week. The reason why I dropped them is solely because while Michigan struggled against Nebraska, I'm looking at that Nebraska game in particular. Michigan was much more dynamic on offense against Nebraska's defense. I think they put up over 400 yards. Michigan State really did not match Nebraska in terms of yardage. I think Nebraska was almost 2/3, either 2/3 or 60% of what Nebraska put out in terms of total offense against Nebraska. And so that's kind of the mark for me. And so I know that's probably an unfair mark, because you could say, well, what about the Rutgers game? Michigan State beat Rutgers 31-13. Michigan beat them 20-13. But I also feel like Rutgers has had a rough stretch the past couple weeks. They had Michigan, then they had Ohio State, and then they get Michigan State. I almost feel like some of the yardage from Michigan State might be more out of exhaustion than anything else. So I feel like I could put Michigan and Michigan State. I feel like they're pretty interchangeable at this point. Michigan at 4. I had them 5th last week. They beat Nebraska. I think Nebraska lost it more than Michigan beat them, but they still got it done. I thought they controlled a good chunk of that game. I've got Ohio State 3. They won 66-17 over Maryland. They could have named the score. I was tempted to put Ohio State above Penn State and Iowa this week, but I've got to see them do it against real competition. And I don't mean that as a slight to Rutgers and Maryland, but Rutgers and Maryland, they're going to be lucky to make it to a bowl game, if we're being honest. Ohio State's got to do it against someone who is competing for the Big Ten championship. Because right now, I don't know if it's real. I think it's real. I think, and we'll talk about this later on in the podcast, but I want to see Ohio State do it to someone real before I raise them any higher than I have them. So Ohio State at 3. I have Penn State at 2. They lost 23-20 to Iowa. Obviously, it was a big game in Iowa City. And then Iowa at number 1, they won that game. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later on, but I'll say this. I think Iowa, by proxy of their record, is number 1. I think Penn State's the better team. And that might upset some Iowa fans, but listen, for those of you who are Iowa faithful, you had every advantage and you were down 20-10 and you needed a backup quarterback and like 5 other replacement players for Penn State to even have a shot to win that game in the 4th. Do you really think if you get Penn State in the Big Ten championship game that you're going to be able to win if Sean Clifford is healthy? I think I think Penn State's the better team. I thought that was very clear. I didn't even think Penn State played a great game, and they were still up by 2 scores late in that game. So Iowa fans, you can hate what I'm saying, but if you're sitting here pounding your chest and mocking Penn State, you better be careful as the Big Ten championship game comes along, because I think you're going to have some issues with whoever comes out of the East. So that's the Big Ten power rankings. I have Iowa at 1 right now, Penn State 2, Ohio State 3. Let me move to the top 10, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Iowa and Penn State in the national conversation. I'll start again at 10. Michigan at 10. I dropped Michigan State outside of the top 10 just barely. I have Ole Miss right outside the top 10 as well. Michigan, number 10. Again, they struggled with Nebraska, but I thought they at least were explosive against Nebraska. I thought Hassan Haskins in particular was just excellent in that game. Ohio State at 9. I had them 8th last week. And you might think, how do you drop Ohio State a spot after beating Maryland 66-17? And my answer is they haven't played anybody. Like, and again, no offense to Rutgers and Maryland, but who's their best win? Is it Rutgers or is it Maryland? Or is it the team that they beat in week 1 that lost to Bowling Green? They haven't beaten anybody. They haven't played anybody. I'm curious to see what they do against Indiana, who has, I think, a pretty good defense. They have no offense right now, but I'm very curious to see what Ohio State does against Indiana in 2 weeks. They're on a bye this week. I have Kentucky 8, and people are probably going to hate that pick, but Kentucky has beaten Florida. And before you say, well, Florida's 4-2, just like Maryland, let's just be real. Do you think Maryland stays within 3 touchdowns of Florida? No. That's why Kentucky's 8. They're probably going to get beat by Georgia anyway this week, but Kentucky's 8 this week. I have Oregon at 7. Listen, if you're talking about power rating, I have Ohio State ahead of Oregon. Oregon has the head-to-head win over Ohio State. By nature of what the polls are supposed to be, you can't rank Oregon below Ohio State at this point. Oregon's best win is against Ohio State. Oregon's best win, like they have none. Like Oregon has the better resume, despite the fact that they lost to Stanford. So I have Oregon at 7. They were 6th last week. I have Penn State 6th. Again, close loss to Iowa. Probably shouldn't have lost that game. But the issue with Penn State is that the wins that were much more highly rated earlier in the season no longer look as good. So they beat Auburn. Auburn's no longer ranked in the top 25. I would probably still have them borderline top 25 team, but it's not as good of a win. Wisconsin, I mean, they look hapless right now. I know they won 24-0, but like, is Wisconsin going to be 7-5 or 6-6 and limp to a bowl game? Like maybe. So I think right now Penn State's wins don't look nearly as good. And so they are 6th. They have a good loss, but their wins are kind of, Alabama at 5. And I know I'll get a lot of vitriol on this, but listen, they lost to Texas A&M. It's not a great loss, right? It's not a great loss. Texas A&M struggled with Mississippi State and they lost. They struggled with Colorado, barely won that game. Texas A&M was playing a backup quarterback and 2 true freshmen on the line. Alabama also has wins against Ole Miss, who I think is a really good team. They have a win over Florida, at Florida. Like those are good wins. And at least right now, and this is the context of a top 10, right now, Alabama has a better resume than Penn State. So I've got Alabama at 5. At 4, I have Cincinnati. I had them 7th last week. Cincinnati, I think right now, their door of opportunity is starting to open a little bit. Their window of opportunity is starting to open. They needed an SEC team to lose. Alabama lost. They needed BYU to lose, and BYU lost. They needed Oklahoma to lose, but Oklahoma did not lose. And Cincinnati has some wiggle room here to maybe make an argument to get in that 14 playoff. So that's great for Cincinnati. That win against Notre Dame is big, at least for the moment. I have Iowa at 3, and Iowa fans, I know you're going to get upset, but this is about context. You beat a Penn State team whose second string quarterback couldn't get the cadence right. That is not that impressive. It's just not. And I think if Iowa wins out, they are in the playoff. So before anyone gets really upset, Iowa has they control their own destiny. But Iowa fans, you need to understand something. If you think that entitles you to think you're going to run the table and you're going to do great the rest of the way, listen, Penn State was better, easily better. Iowa was very lucky to escape that with a win. And I cannot give a lot of credit for that win because, quite honestly, you should have lost. And so I can't put you any better than 3. The reason why I have you ahead of Cincinnati is because of the head-to-head comparison with the Indiana game. But I have Iowa at 3. I have Oklahoma at 2. And that, again, 2 through 4 is really hard to rank. And then 5 through 9 is really hard to rank. And then everything after that is just a disaster, quite honestly, because I don't believe in Michigan. I don't believe in Michigan State right now. I think they're good teams. I don't believe that they're elite teams. I don't believe that Kentucky's elite either, but they have a better win. But Oklahoma, to me, they beat Texas. That's a decent win. I know people will say, but the rest of their resume is not that great, but I don't know what to do between Iowa's win. I put that, for those of you listening podcast, in air quotes. I don't know what to do with that versus Texas's collapse against Oklahoma. And to me, I think Oklahoma turned a corner a bit by putting Caleb Williams in, he's a true freshman quarterback who really turned that game around. And listen, are we really going to sit here and argue that Oklahoma probably doesn't have better talent than Iowa and Cincinnati? Because I think the resumes are kind of comparable, especially if Iowa had won cleanly, then I would have them 2 with complete conviction. But the reality is, I don't think you can say that they win that game if Clifford stays in the game. And I think Oklahoma right now, if we're talking about undefeated teams, I think Oklahoma beats Iowa, and I think Oklahoma beats Cincinnati. And I think their resumes are pretty similar. All 3 of them have a top 25 win, and Oklahoma came back in a rivalry game. So right now I have Oklahoma 2. Honestly, I think you could rank any of those teams 2 through 4 in any order. Georgia's the obvious number 1. It's not close. Nobody is close to Georgia in terms of resume or in terms of talent right now. That can change. Georgia's probably going to have to deal with Bama, and then they're going to have to deal with some playoff teams. And I think Oklahoma can get there. But right now, that's the top 10. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then I will be back. We're going to talk about the rankings more. I'm going to rant a little bit about the rankings, and then we're going to talk about the playoff picture. So we will be back on the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Welcome back to the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. We're going to talk a little bit about the rankings and the playoff a little bit more in depth, because right now we're starting to get into that rhythm and routine. Playoff rankings are going to start coming out soon, and everybody is losing their minds on particularly Alabama's ranking. It's rigged. Alabama's number 5. Why is Alabama 5? Why is Penn State below them? I don't understand. Why is Ohio State not ranked 3rd? Okay. Part of this is my regular frustration with this sport. And I love this sport. I love it dearly. But until you have a playoff system that is mostly, if not fully, objective, the opinions of fans and pollsters and media are all over the place. Just look at the playoff committee. How do you determine who gets in? Well, it's power ratings and resume and strength of schedule and they look better. And did they win a conference championship? Some years that matters, some years it doesn't matter. And it is so subjective. It is impossible to get to really know who the best team is. And yet their prerogative, or not prerogative, their mission is to find the 4 best teams in college football. Well, and then people start saying, okay, well, the 4 best teams are the 4 most talented teams. And then you have teams like Iowa, who's, if you look at ratings and whatnot, they're like, it's about who deserves it. And who do you play and strength of schedule and all that stuff. And then you get in this debate of, well, is it most deserving? Is it best? Is it this? Is it that? And so everybody then has their own opinion about how teams should be ranked. And you see that even in the AP poll and the coaches poll. Well, the coaches poll is just even more ridiculous because different coaches will coach or will vote based on conference allegiance. Some coaches, they have their, assistant quality control guy fill out their poll, and then you have Dabo Swinney, who's like, I'm going to vote Ohio State 11th because they haven't played many people. Good job, Dabo. I will take every chance I can get to troll Dabo, by the way. Great coach, but Ohio State wasn't 11th last year. Anyway, rankings are dumb. Like, and pollsters, and they're paid, they're the media, they're paid to cover their teams. They're regional most of the time. So they don't have a pulse on what's really going on. They look at scores and they're like, oh, I think this and I think that. And then they come up with a top 25 where they probably don't know more than 6 or 8 teams. And then they try to come up with this top 25. And that's how you get Coastal Carolina at 12th when they haven't played anybody, but they're undefeated. And then you have other people who are like, the SEC has all the best teams, so I'm just going to rank them 1 through 14. And then everybody else starting at 15. That doesn't actually happen, but it seems like that sometimes. So every pollster has their own ranking system, how they weight things, and then they're misinformed and all these things. So you get these polls that often are just wrong and dumb. But what's worse is then there's fan reaction to the polls, and there is a lot of vitriol and a lot of frustration, and people are just confused. So I'm going to just try to tease it out a little bit of how I think we should, 1, view rankings and how we should rank teams. And then 2, why it matters how we rank these teams. And I'm going to talk about some of the implications. So 1, how should we rank teams? If we're going to live in a world where we have to live with rankings and not objectivity, like the NFL playoffs, where if you win your division, you go to the playoffs. Gee, wouldn't that be nice? It's simple. We want to know how to get to the playoffs, win your division or have the best record. It doesn't work that way in college football. Why? Because Mark Emmert can't figure out anything in the NCAA. You get paid $3 million a year. Do something. I'm going to get off my soapbox. Anyway, to do rankings right, you cannot project into the future, because the weekly rankings are meant to be the rankings for that week. They are not meant to project in the future. Let me give you an example. In my poll this week, not that I vote in the AP poll, but if I did, I firmly believe, and I didn't believe this for a while, but I firmly believe Ohio State's the best team in the Big Ten. I don't think it's close. Like I've seen Ohio State twice now in person. I think the only back seven that might be able to check them at all in terms of their receivers is Penn State's. I think everybody else is in a lot of trouble. I think if Ohio State played Georgia, Georgia might be in trouble. Now, I'm not saying they would beat Georgia, but the way that CJ Stroud's slinging it, the way that their receivers are playing, Jeremy Ruckert at tight end, Travion Henderson really coming on, that offensive line really gelling. You're talking about probably at least 4 or 5 first-round picks on that offense, at least in the next 2 to 3 years. That's a lot of talent. I firmly believe that they are the best team in the Big Ten right now. I cannot rank them higher than 9th. Maybe there's an argument for 8th. But want to know why I can't rank them higher than 9th? Because they haven't proven it against anybody. They lost to Oregon. That is an actual thing. Like, if you want me to rank them above Oregon, then we might as well just get rid of the college football season and have a beauty contest and say, this one looks prettier than that one. That's my Final Four. Which is kind of what the playoff has felt like over the past few years. But like, we all hate that, right? Well, then I can't put Ohio State ahead of a team that beat them with the same record. At least not until Ohio State beats other teams that are good. And I don't mean good as in like 500 teams. I mean good as in, hey, they might be able to compete for the conference championship or a playoff bid. Ohio State's played nobody. At least no one in that category. Right? So I can't put Ohio State higher than 9th at this point, because Kentucky's beat somebody who's pretty good. And Penn State has beaten a couple teams that, well, they beat Auburn, which I think Auburn is a better win than pollsters are giving them credit for. I think that's a good win. Alabama has a couple of top 25 wins. I mean, so I use that to say, I think by the end of the year, I think it's going to be Ohio State versus Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. I think it's either Ohio State, Iowa, or Penn State, Iowa. And listen, I think Ohio State might throttle Iowa if they continue to progress the way they are. But I cannot put them higher than 9th because of what they have accomplished to date against the competition that they have faced. You just can't do it. It's why Penn State is ranked below Alabama, because Alabama's wins are better than Penn State's right now. Despite the fact that Penn State lost to the number 2 team in the AP poll, I cannot put Penn State any higher than 6th. I cannot put them above Alabama. Before you say, well, that's Alabama bias. Listen, if Penn State beats Ohio State and Michigan State, you know who's going to be above Alabama? Penn State. But they haven't done it yet. So I can't do it. And then, I'm going to get to Iowa. And here's the problem with Iowa. That win needs an asterisk, because it needs an asterisk, and yet you have to honor the result. Because you know what? Iowa could have folded. Spencer Petras doesn't have to throw that 44-yard touchdown. He could have botched it. They could have just kept running the ball. But you know what? I will say this. Iowa did what they had to do to win the game, which I know probably sounds like a total flip-flop. But in the sense of rankings, you have to rank Iowa as an undefeated team because they did win the game. Now, I think Iowa's going to get beat in the Big Ten championship game. I'll go on record right now and say that. And Iowa fans can troll me if I'm wrong. And by the way, Iowa fans, if you're listening, Just understand, I have been on the bandwagon for Iowa since the beginning of the year. Like, I loved Iowa. I said they were going to be 11-1 and get to the Big Ten championship game. They might be 12-0. Like, I don't know who's going to beat them, at least in the regular season. But listen, it was very clear they were not the best team on Saturday. They were not the best team. And yet, I have to rank them in the context of their record and their results. They're 6-0. On paper, they have a win against Penn State, and you have to honor it. And you know what? Iowa will get a chance, most likely, to prove that they are for real as a playoff contender when they get to Indianapolis, if they don't blow it beforehand. They will get a chance. And actually, even if they lose a game, they will get a chance to prove it. They'll get a chance to prove it against Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan State. And they will get a chance to prove whether they're for real or not. But until that time, if Iowa keeps winning, Iowa's going to stay in my top 4. You know, if Oklahoma loses and if Georgia loses and Cincinnati loses, right? Like, Iowa could be the number 1 team in the country. It doesn't mean I think they're the best team. It means that you have to value them based on their ranking, based on their record and the context of their results. Doesn't mean I think they're the best. It means that what they have done and what they've earned thus far is how I am ranking them. So we have to understand that rankings are not about who I think is better. Rankings are about who I think has accomplished the most. And ultimately, as time goes on, we will find out more, which will help our rankings reflect more of who the better teams are. Because you know what? The better teams are going to win more games. Like, if Ohio State really is as good as I think they will be, you know what? They'll go 12-1 and they'll be ranked in the top 4. They'll probably be ranked 3rd or 2nd. If Alabama really isn't as good as we think they are, they'll lose another game or 2 and they won't make the playoff and they'll be ranked below other teams. If Penn State really is a playoff team, they will run the table and they will get in the playoff. But please do not get upset about your ranking just because you think your team is playing good ball, or just because you think there's bias. Alabama is 5th for a good reason. I think they might have the best resume of any team in college football. Georgia probably has a better one. But again, if you really want to start picking things apart, you know, if Oklahoma played Alabama's schedule, would they have fared any better? Would Iowa, if they played Alabama's schedule, Cincinnati played Alabama's schedule, like, would any of those teams still be undefeated if they played Alabama's schedule? Probably not. Like, how would Penn State, Oregon, Kentucky, Ohio State, Michigan fare against Alabama's schedule? I don't know. Probably not as good, or at best equal. So we have to understand that in the context of rankings, and understand we are not, there's not a fight for the playoff yet, right? The only playoff rankings that really matter is at the end of the year. We'll get to playoff rankings and we'll do all that when they start coming out around, I think, Halloween time. And we'll see what the committee's thinking. I think it'll be very curious to see where Cincinnati is in those initial rankings, because we'll kind of actually see what they think of Cincinnati. If Cincinnati is down in the, 8 to 10 range, then it probably tells us that they're not getting in the playoff this year. We'll see what they consider Iowa and Penn State. But the reality is, as we're ranking teams, you have to do it in the context of where we are right now, not down the road. That's what I'm trying to do. That's what other people are doing. There are other groups that don't do that. And they're just saying, I'm ranking who I think the best teams are. And you know what? That's their thing. College football nerds, that's what they do. They're really great at it. People get mad at them all the time. It's like, how could you rank Ohio? I think they were Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, or Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State. And like, how could you do that? They have losses. And it's like, they're not trying to rank based on that criteria. They're doing a power rating, a straight power rating. And that's fine. That's their prerogative. That's not how the polls need to work. So that's my rant. I'm going to get off my second or third soapbox here. The solution is, and I'll probably rant more about this later on in the season, especially as playoff rankings start to come out, is Mark Emmert, do your job, find an objective solution for the playoff, because this 4-team playoff stinks. I'm going to end on that note. This has been the Big Ten Football Talk podcast. Thanks for listening, and feel free to hit me with all the vitriol you want, or feel free to leave a nice remark as well. Make sure to review, to follow, subscribe. Thanks for listening. God bless.